Okay, so I gathered up a few things to get ready to paint. One of the things I have is a candle, and I just need that for the wax because I don't have a crayon. So if you have this kind of candle, you can use that, or you can use a white, any kind of white candle. I have some sandpaper. I have a palette knife, or you can use a kitchen knife, like a butter knife. I've got a sponge. If you don't have a sponge, you can use a paper towel. And then a cup of water, and I happen to have a dropper. You don't need the dropper, but if you have one, it's great. And then these are the printouts that you're going to see on the attachments, and it goes step by step how to wet the paper and then stretch it. And we're using just a cookie sheet or a cardboard to tape it to. You can use an old pizza box if you want. And once it's really dry, you're going to set up your tape and make sure that you press down hard on the tape. So like here, you would use your nail and make sure that the tape's really down before you paint on it, because you don't want the water to go underneath. So I've printed these out. You don't have to print them out, but they are showing the different techniques that we're going to do, and it's got a color picture for you to look at. So the first thing you want to do is wet your brushes and make sure you tap them on the bottom to get rid of all the air that's in them. And that's because the paint will wick or go up into the metal ferrule, and then if you let it dry in there, the next time you go to use the paint, some of that color will come out. And if you were using black last and now you want to use yellow, you're going to end up with green. So whenever I do this, I always dry my brushes just slightly on a paper towel. And you should have hopefully picked up at the school your supplies. If you didn't, you're going to need some watercolor. So I put a little drop of water right here, and I'm going to add some color to that. So you can pick any color you want. And keep adding a little bit of the pigment to the water until it looks, I don't know, a little thicker. You don't want it to be too thin or it'll be too light on the page. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is rinse off my brush. And before I rinse off my brush, I always wipe it in a paper towel so that I don't have to change my water frequently. And that will give me a nice clean brush. So the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to do a wash of color right here. And I'm going to do this wash by wetting it first. It's always a good idea when you're doing watercolor to wet the paper before you start in the area that you're working. It doesn't always blend really well if you try to put it on dry. So then I'm going to load my brush. So I've dried my brush again. I'm just going to load my brush and go across. And this is going to give me a nice wash. And a wash is really just the pigment with water added to it. So if you were doing a sky on the background of a large picture, you definitely want to wet the paper before you start. Then the next block I'm going to do a gradation that's going from light to dark. And you could do it dry. I don't like to do it dry because it doesn't blend really well. So again, I'm going to clean my brush and then I'm going to just wet it. And I'm going to use the same color. So when you're trying to make it go from dark to light, you're gonna bring the color down and then wipe it on the paper towel so that there's not much pigment on the brush. Don't go into the water. If you go into the water, you won't have any pigment. So you want a little bit of pigment. And if I really want it to be darker at the top, I could, add a little bit more at the top. Or I could go right into the paint color itself, right into the pigment, and put that on, and that's going to make it a lot darker right near the top. But I want it to gradually come down. And usually you go like left to right. You don't generally pull down, but you can if, anything is worth doing if it's not working for you. Okay, so the next one says sandpaper, and so I really just need a color there so that it will dry by the time I'm done with this demonstration. And then I can show you what I can do with sandpaper. So I'm going to take some of this purple here, and I'm going to put it on fairly dark. And this time I'm not going to wet the paper first, just so you can see the difference. And you can see it's very vibrant when I don't add water to it first. So if you want to cover something, or you just really like deep colors, you would not wet the paper first. Oops, I keep going into the blue. Okay, so that gives me a nice deep color that I'm going to let dry, because later on I want to scrape some off. So again, I'm going to clean my brush and my paper towel, tap it on the bottom of my water cup, and then dry it again. So now we're going to go to the next block, and this one says, oops, what was that? Okay, I hit a button, sorry. This one says salt. So I want to have a lot of pigment in my water, and I think I'm going to go with, maybe I'll add a little black to this so it's really deep, almost like a dark night. So I'm doing blue and purple and black. Okay. And then, again, I'm going to dry my brush and rinse it. And I want to wet my paper first. So when you're doing salt, you want to make sure that you're getting the salt on there right away before it starts to dry. And I've got some little loose hairs on here. If you get loose hair, back the brush up like that and it will lift it off, and then you can just put it in your paper towel. Okay, so I'm going to put a wash of this blackish purplish blue here that I've got. And I really want to have a lot of pigment in here. If I don't have a lot of pigment, the salt doesn't give me the same effect as it would. So I'm going to go over it with just dipping right into the black. And it doesn't have to be even on here because it's going to be a dark night. And I'm going to take my salt and pinch it. And if you have like ice cream salt, or you have rock salt, the effect is a lot different. You get a much bigger area where what happens is the salt is pulling the pigment towards it, and in the middle of the crystal it'll stay white, but it'll be a really dark outline or edge around that crystal. So we're going to let that dry before we look at it again, and we're going to move on to the next one. So this one is called masking, and you can do that with masking tape. So I've got some masking tape here. If you don't have masking tape, you could do it with clear tape. But I'm just going to tear it. You could cut it into shapes. And we did this in the acrylic sampler. So I'm going to make this one a little more abstract. Sometimes I do a little ship, but I think I'll just place this tape on here like that. Let me do one more piece. And you can plan it out more because you're going to have more time to work on it. Okay, so I want to make sure that those are really pushed down. Use your nail. And then pick whatever color you want. And I think this time I'm going to just do it right out of the pan. These are called pan paints. And instead of, mixing it on the tray first, I'm just going to go right from the pan. But you could do a gradation of tone on here like we did up above, depending on what effect you really want it to have. Sometimes your brush gets a little too dry, so just dip about half the bristles into the water. Don't dip it all the way down. You really want to only add a little bit of water when it's getting too dry. Just dip it to about there in the water. So now that looks pretty good. I'm going to let that dry before I lift these off. And then for the wax masking, I'm going to use my crayon or my candle, and this is just going to resist wherever the wax is. That's going to keep the paint from attaching to the paper. So I'm going to try that, and then use this one too. See what I can get with this. I don't really know. It's hard to see what you're doing until after you put the paint on. And be careful, like this one was lit. I probably should have pulled that off because now I got a little black there that I didn't want. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is put a color on here. And when I'm doing the wax, again, I want the pigment to be pretty intense. So that means more of the pigment, less water. And you could do a gradation of tone, maybe use another color down here and change it a little bit. So the thing about the wax is the wax doesn't ever come off, so you can't like put another color over that. It's always going to be that kind of white granular look. Where with this one you're going to have nice white spots that you could paint a different color, or you could use marker and do some line work in there. Alright, so the next one is alcohol. And if you don't have rubbing alcohol, you could try a little bit of hand sanitizer, like whatever you're using for your hands, or maybe even perfume might work. Experiment. So I do have a little bit of rubbing alcohol, and when you put it on it, it makes an interesting effect. So again, you want to have a lot of pigment. And this time I'm going to use orange. And you can see that I didn't clean my brush very well. So my orange is turning sort of a greenish brown. So if that happens to you, just pull it off with the brush and keep putting it in the paper towel like that. And then really clean your brush better. And sometimes you may end up having to change your water. If you're getting a dull color, could be because your water's starting to get too dirty. Alright, so I'm going to put some on here. And I do want my paint to be wet, I think, when I do this. So I'm going to switch colors now. You can play around with whatever you want. You don't have to do exactly what I'm doing. Okay, So I've got some color there. Now I'm gonna use my dropper. If you don't have a dropper, you can use your brush. I'm gonna put a little bit of rubbing alcohol in the lid. And then I'm just going to put little drops of it on. You can do this with the brush. I like the dropper because I can give it bigger drops or smaller drops depending what I want. You could try brushing it on and see if the brush is different. Like if you want to just do lines, you're going to get a different effect. But it pushes the paint away from where the alcohol is. I don't know if I turn this off. Is that any better? No, it's not. Okay. But you'll see when you do it on yours. You'll get a good feel for it. Make sure that you are being careful not to spill this. If you're working on a wooden table, it will take the varnish off the table. So make sure that you're putting, something over the surface like a garbage bag or plastic before you start working with alcohol on top of a wooden surface. Okay, so what's the next one? The next one is scraping and then the sponge. Let's jump to the sponge. I like the sponge one. So you're going to take a sponge, or you could use a paper towel, and you wet it, but you squeeze out all the water. As you can see when I'm squeezing this, there's hardly any water in there, a little bit. So this is just damp. And then I'm going to just go right into a color. I haven't used green yet. So I could go into the watered down color, or I can go right into the pigment, depending what effect you want and how dark you want your sponge color to be. So you want to kind of look at your sponge and see if you've got a good spot where there's a lot of holes. And then I always like to do it on scrap first. What do I do with my scrap paper? I can't find my scrap paper, so instead I'm going to do it on a paper towel. So I'm going to do it on here first and make sure that I'm getting kind of a overall texture look to it. And I took too much away. Okay. So, if you have a large enough sponge, you can turn it now and put a different color on a clean side. So let's put some yellow on here. But you do want to be careful, and that's one of the reasons in your handout I put in the complementary colors and the information about color, because if you're mixing complements with each other, you're going to end up with a brown. So like if I did red on top of this, or even orange, I would probably get a brownish color. So I'm doing yellow. I could go with blue, but I want to be careful now that I've added yellow not to add purple, because then again I'm going to get that brownish look. But this is nice for doing leaves or trees. You could use it for texture on a brick wall. Okay, so there's that with the sponge, and then you would just clean that out. Okay, so scraping is, we did this with the acrylic paint. I'm going to wet just the bottom edge here, and I'm going to give it a color. So since it's already kind of orangey, I'm going to go with orange. And maybe I'll do some kind of a sky up above it, because I do want it to kind of look like something when it's done, like maybe a landscape. Okay, and then I'll leave a little bit of water a little bit of dry area between the two wet areas, because I don't want them to bleed into each other. But I want to do this while it's still wet, and I'm going to have a paper towel ready, because as I'm scraping it, sometimes a lot of drips get on the knife, and I don't want to have a big drip on here, so I'm going to put my thumb close to the end of the tip, like that, and then I'm going to press really hard and scrape it up. And that will give me, kind of looks like grass or something growing there. It could just be the stems to flowers, and then you can put your flowers on later. Now if I go a little wider, I can get a wider kind of a look to it. So play around with it and get what you like, and then afterwards, if you want, you can put some little details in on top. Okay, so the next one is splatter. And to do splatter, you want your brush to be fairly dry. So I'm going to get a little bit just on the tip of the brush. So I'm putting it on the tip so it's only about halfway up, and then getting a little more pigment on there. And I would normally do this on the scrap paper, so if you have some scrap, test it out first and cover up everything except the square that you're working on. You can do this with old newspaper or tissues, whatever you have. And then when you're splattering, if you remember from when we did this with the acrylic, I talked to you about not holding, you don't want to hold the brush level to the paper because it's going to shoot in the direction that the brush is aiming. So if I don't want to spray across to the wall across from me, I want to aim it downwards at a 45-degree angle, and I'm going to pull up with the knife. And I'm not really doing anything with the brush itself, I'm just pulling up with the knife. I'm just holding the brush in place and pulling up and flicking it. And if you get a big puddle on there, you can dry it off on your paper towel so you don't suddenly get a big blob that you didn't want. I'm not really pushing down with the brush, I'm pulling up with the knife. So experiment on your scrap paper before you go to your good paper. And then maybe add another color. And you could do it so that it's darker on one end and gets lighter as it moves across. And the brush bristles will make a difference in the size of the little droplets. A finer hair on the brush is going to give you a finer misting. So I want to zoom in on that because I feel like you're not probably seeing it all that well. Let's do a zoom. How's that? Probably not even in focus. There you go. Okay, so you can see it's splattered, and you can add other colors to it. You can let it dry, and we could do a wash of color over it. And so I had this as this block is going to be doing a gradation to make this look like a cylinder or a three-dimensional ball. And then the next block that I have here I had as an extra, but I think I'll do dry brush. And I know that you did dry brush on the acrylic, so you hopefully remember how to do it. So let's go ahead and do the dry brush, and then I'll do the ball using the complement. Okay, I've got some eraser dust on there. So when I'm doing dry brush, I want to get just a little bit of pigment on the bristles, just enough to get the color on there without having it too wet. And then I like to split the brush. If you've got a fan brush, You could use that because you're going to get a better split in the brush. I don't know if you can really see, but when I squeeze it, it gives me like a little bit of split there. So I'm going to use it like that, and that gives you a dry brush effect. You could do different colors on here if you want. So there's dry brush. If I go directly into the pigment, I'm going to get a deeper color. Again, I want to split the bristles a little bit, and then there you go. So it shows the texture of the paper and the bristles. Okay, so the next one I'm going to do is the ball, and I want to make it look darker on one side. So the other thing that you do when you're doing watercolor is you wet just the area that you want the color to stay in, and it forms like a barrier. And I'm sure the science teacher would be able to tell you what that is. But it keeps it from spreading into the dry area. It kind of makes a wall. Okay, so I've wet that area, and then I'm going to, I think I'll make this yellow. So I'm going to go over it with yellow. And try to stay inside the lines. Okay. So I'm going to do the complement on the outside of the ball. And as you know, it's a primary and a secondary. So we've got yellow. So the two primaries left over are red and blue, which make purple. So purple is the complement to yellow. And so for this one, I'm going to do it a nice deep color. So I'm not wetting the background at all. Again, because I don't want it to go into the ball. Now you should let your yellow dry if you're doing yellow, but let the ball dry before you do this, because if I accidentally touch the edge of the ball, I am going to get this purple bleeding into it. And I'm trying to do this in a very controlled way. And sometimes letting the color bleed in can be an interesting effect, depending on what it is you're trying to do, like if you're painting flowers. Okay. Alright, so what I would want to do now is let that dry. And while I'm letting that dry, I'm going to do something different in another block. But when this is dry, we're going to go over it with a very light wash of purple, let that dry, and then we're going to go back over it again with yellow so that it ends up looking three-dimensional down there. Alright, so I'm going to go back up to the one that says sandpaper, which is this one at the top corner. And I'm going to use my sandpaper. If you don't have sandpaper, you could use like an emery board for sanding your nails. So I'm gonna do maybe like a hill or something on here. This is how you can remove color. One way of removing color. Gives it kind of a textury look to it. Okay, so this block is going to be about removing color. And if you have paper and you're able to figure out which side is the right side, there's a sizing on the paper, which is something that keeps the pigment from really absorbing in so much that it's hard to remove. Okay, so that is using sandpaper to remove color. And now I'm going to show you how to remove color using the brush. So what I would do is wet the area where I want to remove color, and then use a paper towel, clean paper towel, and absorb it out. Now, if you really need to go back to the white of the paper, you can do a mixture with bleach. You can mix, I don't know, I think it's like 2/3 of a cup of water with 1/3 of a cup of bleach, something like that. And you could use a Q-tip and just mix up a very tiny amount. Don't do like a whole cup, you're not going to use that much. Okay, so that gives you an idea of how you can remove color. Now if I wanted to repaint around here to make this edge nice and crisp, you need to let that dry before you do it, otherwise it's just going to bleed right in. So that's color removal. And then let's do some wet on wet. So I'm going to go over to this one that I did a gradation on, which is so boring right now. And I'm going to wet the whole thing. Just with clean water. And then I'm going to take my brush and use a contrasting color and just see what happens. So I'm going to really fill the brush up with paint, and then I'm just going to draw a couple lines across. And you can see how it bleeds out. And then I'm going to use a different color. Let's see, maybe yellow. Get it on there really thick. I'm just going to put dots on the top and see if it bleeds out a little bit. So this is not as wet as I would like it to be. Let's see if I put a little bit of water. So this is just water. Get it a little more wet and see what happens. So you can see the wetter the paper is, the more the pigment bleeds into each other, and you can get a really interesting effect. But you want to have kind of a lot of pigment on your brush when you're doing it. And be careful again that you're not using complements. You use complements on there, you're going to end up with brown. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is remove the tape on my resist one. So this is pretty dry now, I think. Maybe not. There's a little drop of water I spilled. Now, if the tape doesn't come off nicely, you can use a hair dryer, and that will loosen the glue. Like, let's say you left the tape on overnight and it's really stuck and you can't get it off without tearing the paper. I would heat it up with a hair dryer and then pull it off, and it should come off nicely. And that's the same goes for like your outline when you go to pull it off later. So now with this, I can add colors on top, or I could just leave it white, depending, why you did it. So let's say it was clothing on somebody and you wanted to put stripes on them. You can go back and add a little color. So experiment. Or maybe you want to fill the whole color in. Now doing a glaze in watercolor is also an interesting thing. Like this is red, but if I go over it like this with a color, I'm going to get a completely different effect. But you don't want to do it when it's wet. You want to do it when it's dry. When it's dry, it's called a glaze, and it will actually change the color that's underneath. Still shows through, but you want to do it so that you're not going over and over it, or it'll lift the color underneath. Let's see what happens if I do a little bit of blue glaze on there. So I want to try and do it so I'm only going over it maybe twice, not too many times. I'm going to dry my brush, clean it and dry it, and then maybe just blend it a little bit right here. And if I don't like how dark it is, I can lift some of the color before it dries. Or you can take this and dab it off. May even give you a nice texture. So that's what a glaze is. That's when you put one color over another that's already dry. And that's what we're going to be doing on the ball in a couple minutes. So let's see. This one that has the watercolor looks kind of boring. So we need something there. So again, this is a glaze. And I'm just going to go over top of what I've already got here. So I'm going to be using some of my techniques that I've already shown you. Okay, and then I'm going to use the knife. Now some brushes have like a little edge at the back here that you can use for scraping, like this way. Instead of using a knife, some brushes come with it already on it. So here we're going to pull that up into the sky area. I feel like this light is just not... Maybe that's better. Like that for this one. Now you have to do this when the pigment's wet, and you want the pigment to be fairly thick. Alright, so now I could put something in the sky up above, like, I don't know, maybe an orangish yellowish sun. So just play with it a little bit. And if I don't want my sun going over my grass, just grab it again. Okay. And I could let that dry, and I could go over it with another color, and that would be another glaze. So I have one more thing that I want to show you, and then we'll take the tape off. So I'm going to come down here to the little circle that I made, and I just traced around a cap. So again, this is yellow and purple. Turn the light back on. And they are complements. So I'm going to use a little bit of purple. I'm going to make myself a little puddle with purple. And I don't want it to be this intense. This is way too much purple right here. So I'm going to make myself a puddle of water next to it. And I'm going to move some of it into there. So I really want very little pigment in this when I'm darkening my yellow ball, because I want it to stay yellow. So I'm going to dry my brush. So that's dry, and I'm going to use a little bit of the purple. And put it about 3/4 of the way around one side of the ball. And maybe I could use a little darker. Okay. So once you've got that, you need to start blending it towards the middle, because I want the highlight to be kind of in the middle. I think I'll go all the way around. So I'm going to rinse my brush and dry my brush. So I'm drying it. Where's my brush? Try and get it in the picture. Dry the brush on there. And then while the brush is dry, I'm going to pull the edge, just from the edge. Don't go all the way from out here, just from the edge, in a little bit. And then I guess it's too dry. So I'm going to dip it back in the water. But make sure that you're only doing it from the edge, because if you go all the way from the outside, then you're going to lose the gradation. Okay, so I want to go a little bit darker on the outside. And then I would let this dry. And then I would go over the whole ball again with yellow. Okay. Alright, so while that's drying, I'm going to go to this one, which was our texture. And I'm going to show you how you can just draw some lines with water. So just put some lines down with water. And then take a color, dip your brush, and touch it to those lines of water and see what happens. And it should bleed into the line. Sometimes it's hard to see where your water is. You might have to tilt your paper a little bit. I'll put some water here. Let's see if I just use a much greater amount of water. And see how it kind of bleeds and follows the line. But it stays in that line of water. It's not going to go into the dry part. It's going to always stay just where the water is unless you put your brush on the dry part. Okay, so now I think this one is dry next to us. And so what I'd like to do now is add some yellow. And I have yellow here, but I've actually got an orange on top of it. So I need to clean that out. So if you do this to yourself, just take a dry brush and pull out that color. You don't want to be pushing down in there with a paper towel or you're going to lose all your color. Okay, so now I have my yellow. I'm going to clean my brush, make sure I don't have any orange left on it. And I'm going to put a little bit of water in there and get it nice and like a lot of pigment on the brush. Then I'm going to go over to my ball, and this is dry now, so I'm going to go over the whole ball with the yellow. And I think I'm going to leave a little bit of a highlight in the middle. But see how it pushes the purple back, and now I have, it's come back to yellow. I do have this little bit of lint that I want to get off. Back your brush up on it, and that should lift it off. Okay, and then again I want to blend it right there. So I'm going to rinse my brush, dry it really well, and just pull from the edge to get rid of the hard edge that's there. I just want to blend it a little bit. Now you can fast forward through this at any point, or you can go back and look at parts of it again if you need to. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to show you is cleaning up your tray. When you're done, you want to make sure that you don't have a lot of puddles of water in your paint. So I'm going to take a paper towel and fold it and lay it across and just kind of push in to the holes like that. You don't want to leave it in there because you'll end up with paper the next time you go to use it all stuck to it. Okay, so I'm going to pull that off, and you'll see, you know, that most of the water has come out. And then, you know, if you need to do it again, just fold it over to a clean spot. And then for this part, wet your paper towel or your sponge and squeeze it out, and then just wipe it like that, and then go to a clean spot on the paper towel and wipe it again. Because you don't want to close this up with a lot of water and paint in here, because if you do that, it's going to get into the other colors on the other side. Alright, so I hope you enjoy playing around with the paint and maybe make a painting with the extra paper. If you do a painting, you only have to put tape around the outside edge when you stretch the paper. So the next video is going to be removing the tape.